Hitler, the man who wanted to rule the world, is only the public face. The private man is something that few people seem to understand.
At 96, Wilhelm Schneider's hands still shake when he pours his tea. The same careful hands that once poured wine for Adolf Hitler. For 8 decades, he has lived quietly in a Bavarian village, refusing interviews, denying his past. But now, as the last surviving butler of the Third Reich, he finally speaks. What he remembers from inside the Fuhrerbunker, he says, is not history. It's horror. Is Hitler the cruel person history has always described? The last witness, a man who served the monster. The old man speaks slowly, his German tinged with the soft drawl of Bavaria. His voice is frail, yet steady, like someone unburdening himself after a lifetime of carrying ghosts. I was just a boy, he says. I didn't understand what I was serving. I only saw a man who wanted his napkin folded a certain way. Wilhelm Schneider was born in 1929 in a modest home near Augsburg. His father was a tailor, his mother a maid. The war stole everything: his youth, his innocence, and later, his peace. At 14, he was sent to work as a kitchen aide at a military compound. By 16, through a series of strange promotions and recommendations, he found himself stationed at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain retreat. He was not chosen for loyalty, nor for ideology. He was chosen because he was quiet, obedient, and invisible. I was told never to speak unless spoken to, never to look him directly in the eyes unless he asked a question. Everything had to be perfect: the silverware, the temperature, even the angle of the curtains. He pauses, his gaze distant. You learned quickly that mistakes could cost more than your job. The image of Hitler that the world knows, the screaming dictator, the raised fist, the eyes burning with fury, was not the man Schneider saw in private. He was soft-spoken most mornings, Schneider recalls. He liked silence. He hated the smell of tobacco. He loved sweets, especially those made with apples. But sometimes there was this stillness in him, like something terrible was always waiting to come out. Even at his age, Schneider remembers the rhythms of those days with uncanny precision. The clang of silver trays, the echo of boots in marble corridors, the muffled voices outside the study door. Hitler's inner circle treated him like furniture, yet Schneider saw everything. The power games, the whispers, the fear. They never looked relaxed, he says. Even the powerful men, Goebbels, Himmler, they looked afraid. When the war turned against Germany, the atmosphere grew heavier. Schneider, still just a teenager, was transferred to Berlin in late 1944, ordered to serve in the Fuhrerbunker. He remembers the endless tunnels, the smell of damp concrete, and the distant thunder of bombs. Down there, it was like time had stopped, he murmurs. You could feel death crawling closer every day. Why he stayed silent for so long is a question he answers without hesitation. Shame, he says. After the war, who would believe that I was just a servant? I thought people would spit at me. Maybe I would have too. He lived under a false name for years, moving between towns, working as a cleaner, then a janitor. He married, had 2 children, and never told them the full truth. My son thought I had been a cook for the army, he says with a faint, bitter smile. In a way, I suppose I was, but not for any army worth remembering. Now, in the twilight of his life, he says silence feels heavier than guilt. I'm not proud. I didn't fight. I didn't resist. But I saw things people should know before I go. As the light fades through the window, his hands tremble over the cup of tea, spilling a few drops on the table. He looks at them for a long time, the same hands that once brushed dust from the lapels of a man history calls a monster. I served him, he whispers, but I never understood him. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. But what Schneider remembers from behind those guarded doors, the private world of the Führer, is darker, stranger, and far more human than history ever dared to record. Inside the wolf's lair, a butler's unfiltered glimpse. Power, Schneider begins softly, isn't loud. It's quiet. It sits at a table, sipping soup, pretending to be civilized while the world burns outside. When he first arrived at the Wolfschanz, the wolf's lair, the sprawling, camouflaged command complex hidden in the forests of East Prussia, he was barely 17. The war had turned. Russia was advancing. Hitler was no longer the confident figure Schneider remembered at the mountain retreat. He was thinner, paler, his right hand trembling slightly as he lifted a glass. Yet the rituals continued. Meals were served at precisely 1 p.m. and 7 p.m. No meat, ever. Hitler's vegetarian meals were prepared in a separate kitchen, inspected twice by tasters before reaching his table. Schneider was tasked with setting the table and standing silently behind the chair, back straight, eyes lowered. Every movement was rehearsed, he recalls. We had to turn plates a certain way, fold napkins in a specific triangle. You couldn't cough, you couldn't sigh, you just listened, and in those silences, you learned more than anyone ever meant to say. The Führer's dining table was more than a place to eat. It was a stage. Schneider watched as generals and ministers tried to read his moods, laughing at his rare jokes, nodding even when he said nothing at all. He liked control, Schneider says, not just over the war, over the air in the room. He wanted everyone to breathe when he breathed. But sometimes, Schneider glimpsed something unsettling beneath the composure. He'd stare into space for minutes, eyes not really seeing anyone. Then suddenly, he'd snap back and bark an order. His moods were like storms, sudden, violent, and then gone, leaving everyone shaking. At night, when others slept, Schneider would pass the study door and hear voices, Hitler dictating to his secretaries, pacing, muttering about betrayal. He was obsessed with loyalty. Schneider remembers, every mistake was someone else's fault. He trusted no one, not even those who worshipped him. He pauses, eyes distant. There was one evening I'll never forget. It was winter of 1944. Snow blanketed the compound. Hitler was dining alone, rare. Even then, he pushed the plate away untouched and asked Schneider to bring him hot water with lemon. When he returned, Hitler gestured for him to stay. He asked me, "Do you believe in fate?" I didn't know how to answer. He said, "History chooses its instruments. We don't choose history." Then he looked at me, really looked. His eyes were pale blue, almost cold, and he smiled, like he'd told a secret. Schneider admits he didn't understand the weight of those words until years later. He wasn't mad in that moment. He was convinced. That's what frightened me most, his calm. He saw Eva Braun occasionally, cheerful on the surface, but often pacing, restless. She tried to make things normal, he says. Music, laughter, pretending the world wasn't ending, but you could see fear in her smile inside the wolf's lair. The line between devotion and delusion blurred daily. Even the staff whispered their doubts in corners, never aloud. We all knew something was wrong, Schneider says, but fear was a stronger master than conscience. Every night, Schneider wiped the polished silver and crystal clean under dim light. He heard distant gunfire sometimes, a dull reminder that the world outside was collapsing. Yet, within those reinforced walls, Hitler's table remained immaculate, like a shrine to denial. And still, there were small, human moments that haunted him the most. He loved his dog, Blondie. Schneider recalls softly. He'd kneel to feed her with his hands, smiling like a gentle man. Then, hours later, he'd order another city burned. It didn't make sense. How could kindness and cruelty live in the same person? That contradiction stayed with him through the decades. People think evil always looks monstrous, he says, but sometimes it wears clean boots, says thank you, and feeds its dog before destroying millions. In those silent halls, amid maps and orders and nervous laughter, Schneider realized he was witnessing not only the downfall of a regime, but the unraveling of a man who could no longer tell reality from myth. The wolf's lair wasn't just his headquarters, he says quietly. It was his cage, and in a way, all of us inside were trapped with him. But even more chilling than Hitler himself were the men who surrounded him, the ones who smiled, saluted, and carried out his madness with terrifying devotion. The men around Hitler. Schneider often said that the bunker felt less like a workplace and more like a theater, where everyone knew the play was ending. Each man, he recalled, was acting for a role he no longer believed in. He remembers Joseph Goebbels first, thin, intense, always rehearsing words, even when no one listened. He moved like a preacher, Schneider said, and his voice never rested. Goebbels filled the narrow corridors with speeches about destiny and sacrifice, his every sentence stitched with desperation. Behind closed doors, though, Schneider once saw him collapse into a chair, whispering, "It's over." 5 minutes later, he straightened his tie, walked out, and smiled for the others. Himmler, on the other hand, seldom entered the bunker. When he did, Schneider said, the air turned colder. He didn't shout, he recalled. He stared, as if calculating how many lives a glance could command. Himmler's politeness was mechanical, his courtesy practiced. He'd thank you for the tea and speak about extermination as if it were administration. Then there was Martin Bormann, Hitler's gatekeeper, resented, feared, indispensable. He ran the place, Schneider said. He decided who breathed near the Führer. Bormann treated servants like wallpaper and generals like children. Schneider once overheard him murmur, "Let them fight for ashes. I'll keep the keys." Even at 17, Schneider understood that Bormann's real weapon was proximity. Amid these men drifted Eva Braun, the ghost of normalcy. "She was kind to us," Schneider admitted. "She asked about our families, even when we had none left. Yet her kindness frightened him more than cruelty could. It proved that you could love a monster and still smile." He recalled her laughter echoing down the corridor, a sound almost obscene against the rumble of artillery above. Every day followed the same grim rhythm: reports, rage, silence. The war reports arrived folded like death notices. Goebbels would interpret them, Himmler would deny them, and Bormann would hide them. They were men drowning, Schneider said, but each pretended to be the one holding the lifeboat. He remembered a night when the tension snapped. Hitler's temper erupted after a failed counterattack. He screamed until his voice broke, Schneider said. Then he turned to Goebbels, who just nodded, eyes wet, whispering, "We will find victory in death." No one contradicted him. Not one outside those meetings. The same men whispered doubts. Goebbels begged a secretary to find sleeping pills. Bormann hoarded wine in case the end required toasts. Himmler sent secret messengers seeking terms with the Allies. Schneider saw hypocrisy turning to madness. They were terrified not of death, but of losing the story they'd built, he said. Without Hitler, they were nothing. The servants felt that fear seep through the walls. Boots clicked softer. Laughter vanished. Everyone flinched at the creak of a door. "You stopped breathing when the Führer entered," Schneider remembered. "And when he left, you wondered if you'd still be alive by morning." He never forgot the final meeting he witnessed among them. Hitler sat motionless while Goebbels read a report about Berlin's encirclement. No one dared speak. Then Bormann said quietly, "My Führer, perhaps it is time to consider." Hitler's hand slammed the table. "Time?" he shouted. "Time is for the weak." The room froze. Goebbels' face turned white. Schneider, standing by the wall, felt his knees tremble. It was like watching gods realize they were mortal, he said. When the meeting ended, they filed out wordlessly. Bormann's mask of confidence cracked. Goebbels clutched a photograph of his children. "That's when I knew," Schneider whispered, "that they feared him more than they feared the Allies." Those men, who once commanded armies, were now prisoners of the very myth they had created, shadows in uniform orbiting a dying sun. The collapse. When the walls began to crumble. By early April 1945, the air inside the bunker had grown thick and stale, heavy with smoke, sweat, and despair. The ground above trembled every few minutes, Soviet shells pounding closer. The corridors smelled of damp concrete and fear. "We lived beneath the earth," Schneider said softly. "It was like the world had already buried us." Food grew scarce. The grand meals of Berghof days were gone. Potatoes boiled in thin broth replaced the fine dishes of the past. The lights flickered often. Ventilation failed. Sometimes the power went out, and we'd sit in darkness, hearing only the bombs and our own hearts, Schneider recalled. No one spoke then. Silence felt safer than words. Hitler's health deteriorated before their eyes. His skin turned sallow, his posture bent. His hand trembled so badly he often used both hands to hold a cup. Yet he refused medicine beyond his trusted drops and pills from his physician, Theodor Morell. Schneider noticed how those pills made him sweat and shake more. He looked like a man already fighting ghosts, he said. Despite everything, the routines continued, obsessively. Meetings still began at precise hours. Reports still arrived, folded neatly on the same desk. Even when Berlin was burning, Schneider said, he asked if the tablecloth was ironed. Denial had become discipline, but the facade was cracking. Servants whispered that Himmler had fled, that Göring had sent a telegram offering to take command. Hitler flew into rages that left the walls shaking. Schneider once saw him hurl a map to the floor, shouting, "Everyone has betrayed me. Everyone!" No one dared move. Eva Braun stood in the corner, silent, her face pale.
Braun has been Hitler's mistress for 14 years, but the relationship is being kept hidden from the German people.
As if she, too, realized that the empire had died before the man. In those days, the bunker became a tomb of routine. Eva tried to brighten the air with laughter, asking Schneider to bring her lipstick, playing gramophone records of old dance tunes. It was eerie, he remembered. She'd dance alone, and for a moment, you could almost forget the war. Then a bomb would fall, and she'd stop, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Outside, the ground above them shattered day and night. The news worsened. Soviet troops in the city, artillery at the gates, the Reich in ashes. Schneider carried water through the narrow passages, his boots echoing against concrete walls. Sometimes I heard crying from rooms I couldn't enter, he said. Officers weeping quietly. Grown men praying to a god they hadn't spoken to in years. And yet, Hitler kept issuing orders, phantom armies, divisions that no longer existed. He traced lines on the map with a shaking finger, Schneider said. He spoke of counterattacks that would never come. It was like watching a man command ghosts. One morning, Schneider was summoned to the conference room with other servants. Hitler addressed them briefly. His voice was hoarse but controlled. He thanked them for their service and told them they could leave if they wished. No one moved, Schneider said. We didn't know if walking away meant freedom or a bullet. As the days blurred, Schneider began to lose track of time. He stopped shaving. Meals turned to rations of canned food and water. The once immaculate uniforms of the staff hung loose, stained with soot. We were all dying in slow motion, he said. Then came the night of April 28th. The bombing was relentless, closer than ever. Dust rained from the ceiling. In the kitchen, Schneider heard Hitler's voice raised in fury. The news of Himmler's betrayal had reached him. He screamed for hours, Schneider said. It was like listening to a god realize he was mortal. After that, Hitler changed. He went quiet, Schneider remembered. No anger, no shouting. Just silence. He moved like a ghost. He spoke softly, even kindly to Eva. He said she should leave. She refused. On April 29th, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief ceremony inside the bunker. Schneider stood among the witnesses, watching the couple exchange vows as artillery thundered overhead. "It didn't feel like a wedding," he said. "It felt like the end of the world, pretending to be holy." That night, Hitler called for his staff. He shook their hands, thanked them again, and dismissed them. "He looked small," Schneider whispered. "Not the man who conquered nations, just an old, sick man, waiting for silence." Outside, the city was on fire. Inside, Schneider felt something colder than fear. The stillness before an ending everyone could feel, but no one dared name. What did it look like? The exact moment when the man who once ruled millions chose to end his own life beneath the ruins of his empire? The day he died. What Schneider saw. April 30th, 1945. The day the silence finally came. Schneider remembers the bunker as unnaturally still that morning. The bombardment above had quieted for the first time in days, as if even the world paused to witness what was about to happen. The corridors were filled with whispers, doors shut softly. Footsteps were cautious, respectful, like mourners already walking through a graveyard. "I woke before dawn," Schneider recalled. "No one slept. You could feel something in the air. Heavy, final Hitler had breakfast with Eva Braun in his private quarters.
Their private life together in the bunker is confined to a few small concrete rooms.
Schneider didn't serve them that morning, but one of the attendants told him later, tea and a little bread with honey. "Simple," Schneider said, "too simple for what it meant." Around noon, the staff gathered quietly near the corridor outside Hitler's study. Eva passed them on her way in. She was calm, Schneider said, smiling faintly. She thanked the secretaries for their loyalty. "I thought her hands might shake, but they didn't." Then came Hitler himself. Schneider was standing by the wall, pretending to busy himself with a tray. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. His eyes, there was nothing left in them. He nodded once to us. No words. Just that. The door to the study closed. Schneider remembers how minutes stretched into eternity. The low hum of the air vent, the distant thud of artillery, the faint ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Every sound carved itself into his memory. Then, at exactly 3:30 p.m., a sharp, muffled sound echoed through the corridor. A single gunshot. "No one moved," Schneider said softly. "No one breathed." We knew. He waited. Seconds passed like hours. Then the door opened slightly, and one of the aides, Ling, perhaps, stepped out, his face pale, trembling. He whispered, "It's over." Inside, Schneider saw through the open doorway only a glimpse. The faint smell of gunpowder, a wisp of smoke hanging in the air. Hitler slumped on the sofa, a pistol in his hand. Eva beside him, her head tilted slightly, lips stained blue from poison. "I thought I would feel anger," Schneider confessed, "or relief, but I felt nothing. It was too quiet for feelings." He helped bring in the blankets, as ordered. Hitler's body was wrapped quickly. The air was thick not just with smoke, but with disbelief. It was like the bunker had stopped breathing, he said. Even the walls seemed to listen. Outside, the aides carried the bodies up the narrow staircase to the courtyard. Schneider followed halfway, unable to stop himself. "The air hit me like fire," he said. Everything above ground was burning, smoke, rubble, black sky. They laid the bodies side by side. Gasoline was poured over them. Someone struck a match. "The flames rose fast," Schneider whispered. The wind blew the smoke toward the chancellery. It smelled like burnt oil and iron, and something I still can't describe. He turned away. I couldn't watch. I remember thinking, this is what a god looks like when he becomes ash. Inside, the bunker was silent again. No one spoke. A few officers wept quietly. Others sat blankly, staring at nothing. It was like the spell broke, Schneider said. We were free, but there was nowhere left to go. That night, Schneider sat on a crate in the kitchen, staring at his hands. They were shaking, he said, not from fear, from emptiness. For years, those hands served a man I thought untouchable, and now he was gone. Burned, gone like dust. He remembered Eva's perfume, still lingering faintly in the hallways, mixed with smoke. That's what haunted me, he said. Not the gunshot, the perfume. As the hours passed, the sound of shelling resumed. The Soviets were closing in. Orders came to destroy documents, to burn photographs, to erase the last traces of a dying empire. Schneider obeyed. You don't question anything after witnessing death that close, he said. Before dawn, he walked one last time through the bunker's narrow corridor. The lamps flickered. The air was thick and sour. He passed the empty rooms, Hitler's study, Eva's chamber, the map room. It felt like walking through ghosts, he said. He touched the cold metal of the study door, then turned away. That was the last time I ever went inside, he whispered, and the last time I ever spoke his name aloud until now. But surviving the end of Hitler was not the same as escaping him because, even after the bunker turned to ashes, his shadow followed Wilhelm Schneider wherever he went. Escape and disguise. From Hitler's shadow to freedom. When the Soviets stormed Berlin, the ground shook like thunder. Inside what was left of the bunker, orders fell apart. Officers argued, maps burned, boots pounded the corridors. It was chaos, Schneider said. We weren't soldiers anymore, just frightened people trying to find a hole to hide in. He left the bunker 2 days after Hitler's death. Dressed in a stolen uniform that didn't quite fit, he climbed through a ventilation shaft and into the ruins above. Smoke stung his eyes. The city he'd once known was gone. Buildings collapsed, streets buried in ash, the air thick with gunpowder. I walked through ghosts, he said. There were bodies in the gutters. Tanks melted into the pavement. And the smell, you never forget that smell. He followed a group of retreating soldiers until they scattered under fire. Then, alone, he wandered through alleyways and broken stairwells until he found shelter in the basement of a bakery. The woman there fed me, he recalled. She didn't ask questions. Maybe she didn't want to know days blurred into weeks. The war ended, but Schneider's fear did not. Every time I heard boots, I thought they were coming for me, he said. Soviet patrols dragged men out of buildings. Some never returned.
And written his last will and political testament, urging his followers to continue the fight.
He burned his papers, tore the insignia from his jacket, and began calling himself Hans Bauer. Under that name, he moved through the ruins of Germany, cleaning floors, washing dishes, sleeping in barns. I learned to keep my eyes down, he said. Silence was safer than truth. Once, an Allied officer questioned him near Munich. He asked where I'd been during the war. Schneider remembered. I told him I worked in kitchens. He looked at my hands, soft, unscarred, and nodded. Maybe he saw the lie. Maybe he was tired of hunting ghosts. Years passed. He found work as a janitor in a textile factory, then as a caretaker in a church. He married a woman named Marta, who loved him for his quiet ways. He never told her everything. I said I had been a servant for officers, he said, not for him. Even as peace returned, Schneider felt he carried something poisonous inside him, not guilt for crimes he hadn't committed, but shame for proximity to evil. People want villains and heroes, he said. I was neither. I was the furniture that evil sat on. In 1952, he was briefly detained by Allied investigators after a list of former Reich staff surfaced. They questioned him for hours, then released him. They said I was too young to be important, he said. They were right, but not entirely. After that, he disappeared again, changed his name one more time, built a quiet life. Every time someone asked about the war, he'd answer, I was just a cook. But the past never stopped whispering. Sometimes, in dreams, he saw the bunker again, the smoke, the gunshot, the flames. "It's strange," he said. "I escaped alive, but I never truly got out." But silence, he would later admit, can be heavier than guilt, and for Wilhelm Schneider, it became a life sentence. The weight of silence and the final confession. For decades, Wilhelm Schneider lived with a past that refused to rest. His memories of the bunker, the smoke, the gunshot, the faces frozen in fear became nightmares that visited him in sleep and in quiet moments of daily life. He rebuilt a life outwardly normal: marriage, children, work in obscurity, a house filled with love. Yet beneath that veneer, the weight of survival pressed relentlessly. Could he have done more? Could he have resisted, warned, acted? These questions haunted him quietly, like shadows no light could touch. It was only in recent years, with the troubling rise of extremism across Europe, that he felt compelled to speak. "Silence helps evil survive," he said. "I stayed silent for too long. Now I have to tell the truth before I go." Schneider's reflection on evil is both simple and terrifying. It begins quietly, nurtured by obedience, fear, and small acts of complicity. He wants future generations to understand this. History is shaped not only by tyrants, but by those who serve them without question. "Evil doesn't always wear a uniform or scream," he said. "Sometimes it sits at a table, folding napkins, serving tea, and waiting for the world to look away." His confession is weary, human, and unflinching. He does not ask for absolution, only understanding. "I was a witness," he said. "I am not a hero, not a villain, but I saw, and it is my duty to tell what I saw." As he folds his hands, the lines of age tracing a lifetime of memory and regret, his final words linger. "I served him, but I never understood him." And perhaps that is the most terrifying truth, that evil can be ordinary, human, and still destroy the world. Remember that. Remember us. Wilhelm Schneider finally spoke, leaving the world a chilling lesson on obedience, fear, and the human face of evil. Subscribe to uncover more untold stories that history almost forgot.